Yes, people, welcome back to the African Diaspora News channel with me, Richard Sudan. Thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe and support the platform. Now, I wanted to make a quick video for you today to talk about something which kind of made the news, but I wanted to give it a few days really to see if there was much news made of it. There wasn't really too much news made of it here in the UK, and I wondered if there was in the United States, but I've left it a few days. And as I predicted, this story pretty well got buried, and I think it's a very interesting story indeed, really. So there's a report which has come out recently, which is very damning of the United States regarding the police brutality and the constant killings of black people in the US. Before I get a little bit into that report, I just want to give a bit of background to how the report came about, and it's a pretty significant report in my view, and the reason why it's been buried is because of the significance of this report. Now, following the murder of George Floyd last May, there were a number of families in the United States, including George Floyd's family and other families, and these families basically got together and they basically petitioned the United Nations. They wanted the United Nations to conduct a formal investigation into the ongoing brutal murders and systemic racism of the police force. Now, of course, the United States, much like the United Kingdom where I am, the United States and the United Kingdom, they claim to be champions of human rights, and they claim to care about human rights abroad, but we often know, of course, the reality with what the armed forces of the United States does abroad, and of course its ally, the United Kingdom, and of course the United Kingdom follows the United States regarding any military interventions that the United States wants to get involved in. And so a lot of people have found this hypocritical. Now, before I get into the report, I just want to remind people that actually the constant killings of black people in the United States and the recent move by a number of families to bring this to the United Nations, to bring about a formal investigation. This isn't the first time by any stretch that this has really happened. What I was reminded of when I saw this story really was, of course, Malcolm X, the late and very great Malcolm X, who also wanted to charge the United States for its ongoing crimes against black people at the United Nations, and he wanted to draw support from other nations around the world to really say to the United States, what's going on? You need to get your own house in order. You need to deal with these crimes of brutality in the United States towards your own citizens. And of course, black people built the United States as we know it. There would be no United States if it wasn't for foundational black Americans and the descendants of slaves that literally built the country. So before we get into what happened with this call to the United Nations to investigate crimes in the United States, I just want to remind ourselves of what Malcolm X had to say regarding his plan to bring these crimes to the United Nations.
They can't solve the race problem.
Do you intend to take any part in the political campaign this fall?
We intend to take part in everything that will get results at eliminating the injustices that our people are confronted with in this country. Politically, economically, anything.
Will you support candidates of either of the two parties?
We'd rather not say at this time.
Are you prepared to work with some of the leaders of the other civil rights organizations?
Certainly. We will work with any groups, organizations, or leaders in any way, as long as it's genuinely designed to get results.
So fast forward to 2021 and we were in the exact same situation. The ongoing racist killings by the United States police force and the systemic injustice which sees those police almost never held to account continues to this day. So we had a group of families, George Floyd's family and others, and they petitioned the United Nations. And what happened was the United Nations basically, under pressure from the Trump administration, ran away from the calls to conduct a formal investigation into these crimes. The United Nations cowered under pressure because, of course, the United Nations is really controlled by the United States. There's a couple of other nations that have, certain power in the United Nations, but it's really the United States that wields the ultimate power in the United Nations. So, no report from the United Nations into these crimes. Yet again, not really a surprise there. But this is the story really, and this is the story that I think got buried. What was interesting was a group of international lawyers and human rights experts from around, I think, 11 or 12 countries around the globe, all different countries, serious, lawyers and human rights experts. They basically stepped into this void and said, all right, the United Nations is not going to conduct a report into these crimes by the police in the United States. We're going to conduct our own research. And so they did. And they began this research. And recently the findings of this research and this report were actually published. And what this report said was actually that the crimes committed against black people in the United States were actually crimes against humanity. Now, they brought together a wide range of experts and they looked at a number of cases, but they focused very specifically on around, I think, 44 cases of black people dying at the hands of the police in the United States. And in all 44 of those cases, I think we're talking about 43 fatalities, and the one black man who survived, I'm pretty sure, was Jacob Blake, who I think was shot in Kenosha, and he was left paralyzed as a result of being shot by the police in front of his children. I think he was in his car in front of his kids when he was killed. So the research into these cases was very, very thorough, and I stress again, this was a team of leading experts, and they concluded on a number of levels that the United States is, in legal terms, committing crimes against humanity against black people in the United States. Now, first of all, of course, this is really a vindication of what we all know, and actually what many people around the world have really come to conclude regarding the conduct of the United States police force, just running around killing black people, men, women and children with impunity, and almost always getting away with it. Of course, everyone's talking and celebrating the conviction of Derek Chauvin recently. I mean, he's yet to be sentenced. This is a stepping stone really towards the process of justice, but it's just one case. Unless we see this, kind of set a precedent in the future for all the killings that are going to happen, and have happened since, really. Since the conviction of Derek Chauvin. The conviction of Derek Chauvin is really just symbolism. But this report that I'm talking about was very damning indeed. And not only did this report conclude that the killings of black people in the United States are crimes against humanity, these experts and lawyers, they called for the International Criminal Court to conduct an immediate investigation into these crimes. They've demanded there's an immediate investigation into these crimes. Of course, there almost certainly won't be an investigation into those crimes because, the United States wields kind of, ultimate power when it comes to these institutions like the International Criminal Court and the United Nations. But nevertheless, it is a reminder to other people around the world of just how bad the situation in the United States really is. The United States and of course the United Kingdom, its number one ally, they're so quick to talk about crimes against humanity in other countries. They're so quick to talk about alleged crimes against humanity in other countries. And these claims, when they're made by the US and the UK, are almost always followed by a military intervention, some kind of military invasion, some kind of military occupation of another country to bring about so-called democracy, but really to steal the resources of those countries. And so this report is interesting, but what I kind of knew would happen is this report got buried. This report got buried in the mainstream news. I want to hear if you guys even heard about this report, which concluded the United States has committed ongoing crimes against humanity. I bet you didn't in the United States. The story virtually got buried here in the United Kingdom too, which is why I wanted to make a quick video about it. Now, this report talked about the police killings, but it also talked about the system in the United States and how the system really views black people as targets, and that explains, of course, why white police officers, racist police officers, are almost never held accountable. I think some of the figures that were talked about in this report, for example, and it's a long report. The report itself is about 188 pages long. It's very thorough, very comprehensive. I myself haven't been able to read all of it yet. I'm about a quarter of the way through, but it talks about a number of things, really. For example, since 2005, one of the points is 15,000 people have been killed by law enforcement in the United States. Hardly any officers have been charged, and there's been about only 35 convictions. Now, I think another thing we can probably all agree on is that if a police force like the police force in the United States was really operating how it does in any other country, just killing black people with impunity, the world will be talking about, and the United States will probably be talking about, invading that country for a so-called humanitarian intervention. So the question is, what is going to happen now? You know, Joe Biden, of course, and his administration and all the politicians have ignored this report. But if this was happening in another country, they would be talking about enforcing a no-fly zone. They would be talking about sanctions. They would be talking about all kinds of other punitive measures for these countries. But of course, this won't happen to the United States, and they won't even acknowledge the crimes against humanity that are continually committed against black people in the US who built the United States. For people that did pick up on this report, again, it speaks of the massive levels of, hypocrisy that we see from, continually from whichever US government is in power. I mean, Joe Biden happens to be leading the administration that's in power now. But Joe Biden, we all know his history regarding racism and white supremacy. He pushed through the 94 crime bill. He's worked with segregationists. He's made so many racist statements, even in the lead up to the election. This is nothing new, really. But of course, Joe Biden, it is what it is. And I think another thing that was telling recently, of course, was, the protests that we saw in the US. A number of protests that happen. And of course, Joe Biden is always quick to demand peaceful protests. He's condemning those that are out there voicing their concern about what's going on. But he's got nothing to say about the evident, obvious, systemic and rampant racism in the United States. He's got nothing to say about it. And of course, Joe Biden has pretty much done something for every other group in the United States except for black people who built the country. I would say there are more and more people around the world waking up to this fact. I do think there is a bit of a disconnect maybe between the mainstream media and I would say a lot of ordinary people around the world who are very aware of the massive breaches of human rights, the crimes against humanity, against black people in the United States. More and more people are waking up. Of course, there are millions around the world that have kind of bought into this kind of lethal cocktail of lies regarding Joe Biden, that somehow he was going to cure the world, cure America of white supremacy and racism in the United States. I think personally it's getting worse. I think by Joe Biden prioritizing every other group except black Americans, he's literally green lighting more violence against black people in the US. So yeah, I just wanted to bring this report to you. I urge you to take a look at the report. It goes into great detail really about how and why these crimes in the United States perpetuate, and the legal case for, just like Malcolm X talked about, the legal case for bringing the fact that the United States and its police force are committing ongoing crimes against humanity regarding the constant murder of black people in the US is a compelling and thorough report. This is the reason the report has got buried. This is massively hypocritical of both the UK and the US, and of course their compliant mainstream medias. So yeah, that's me signing off for now. Much love and respect to all of you. Solidarity with our black American family over there in the US. We see you in the UK. You have our you have our continued commitment and support for the situation you're dealing with. The world is watching. I do believe the world is more and more aware of what's going on, and there is more support towards Black Americans regarding the ongoing and brutal injustice. So I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you for tuning in. This is the African Diaspora News channel. My name is Richard Sudan. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
In search of a financial opportunity to pay off student loans, a young Black American woman moves to South Korea to work. As the author, Bootsy W. recalls culture shock and fun adventures in a country far from home. She's also faced with anti-Black racism and featureism, quickly learning that white supremacy is practiced not only by whites, but by those that are categorized as people of color. Based on her 10 years of living abroad, the book, Ago Igo, compares and contrasts Korea versus the United States on subjects such as code, communal living, racism, effective protests, global alliances, warrior class, music, political correctness, health, aging, money, and the coronavirus. This blunt memoir is uncomfortable, humorous, and educational. Help fight propaganda and mainstream agendas by picking up a copy of Ago Igo on Amazon.com.
Hello, everyone. Please make sure you subscribe to the African Diaspora News Channel app on these platforms.